Imagine being so corrupt that your government sentences you to death. Not prison, not house arrest, death for taking bribes. Now imagine those bribes totaled $33.4 million, and you were supposed to be running your country's sports programs, preparing athletes for the Olympics, promoting fitness for children. Instead, you were running what might be the most elaborate cash-for-favors scheme in sports history. This is the story of Gou Zhongwen, China's former sports minister, who just got sentenced to death, had his entire fortune seized, and became a cautionary tale so extreme that even other corrupt officials are probably watching this case thinking, man, maybe I should just retire to a beach somewhere before they come for me too. And trust me, fam, this story has everything. Luxury watches worth more than your house, secret bank accounts, Olympic-level corruption, and a government that does not play around when it comes to making examples out of people. Before we dive into this absolutely wild tale of greed, power, and consequences, smash that subscribe button because we're about to explore one of the most shocking corruption cases in recent history. Drop a comment telling us, what's the craziest corruption scandal you've ever heard of? Now let's get into it. First, let's talk about who Gou Zhongwen actually is, because understanding his rise makes his fall so much more dramatic. Gou Zhongwen wasn't some low-level bureaucrat pushing papers in a forgotten office. This man was at the top of China's sports hierarchy. He served as the Minister of the General Administration of Sport of China from 2016 to 2022. For those of you who don't speak bureaucracy, that means he was basically the emperor of Chinese sports. Every athlete training for the Olympics, he had influence over their programs. Every sports facility being built, he had a say. Every major sporting event China hosted or participated in, he was involved. We're talking about a position with immense power in a country that takes sports incredibly seriously as a matter of national pride. China doesn't just participate in the Olympics, they dominate. They see athletic achievement as proof of their system's superiority. So the person running sports isn't just managing games, they're managing a crucial piece of China's international image and soft power strategy. Gou Zhongwen held this position during a critical period. He was in charge during the lead-up to the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Remember those? The ones that cost billions of dollars to host. The ones that were supposed to showcase China's organizational prowess and winter sports development? Yeah, he was the guy running that show. But here's where things get interesting. Gou's career in government stretched back decades. He didn't just appear in 2016 and immediately start the sports ministry. He worked his way up through various positions, building connections, learning how the system worked, and apparently, figuring out every possible way to monetize his influence. Before becoming sports minister, he held various positions in Shaanxi province, one of China's coal-rich regions. If you know anything about Chinese provincial politics, you know that areas with valuable natural resources like coal are absolutely ripe for corruption. There's so much money flowing through these regions that keeping your hands clean requires either incredible willpower or incredible stupidity about how the game is played. And Gou Zhongwen was neither incredibly willful nor incredibly stupid. He was, it turns out, incredibly corrupt. So how does someone accumulate $33.4 million in bribes? Because let me tell you, that's not pocket change. That's not, oh, someone gave me a nice watch and I forgot to declare it. That's systematic, organized, long-term corruption on an industrial scale. According to the Chinese court documents and state media reports, Gou's corruption fell into several categories. Let's break them down, because honestly, the creativity of corruption is kind of impressive in a deeply disturbing way. First, there's straightforward bribery. This is the classic corruption playbook. Someone wants something, they give you money or gifts. You use your position to give them what they want. In Gou's case, this could be anything from construction contracts for sports facilities to favorable treatment in bidding processes to appointments to cushy positions within the sports administration. Imagine you're a construction company and you want to build the stadium for a major sporting event. That's a multi-million-dollar contract, potentially hundreds of millions. So you approach the sports minister and you say, hey, we'd really like this contract. What would make you happy? And if the answer is $1 million in my Swiss bank account, well, that's just the cost of doing business, right? Wrong. Obviously wrong. But that's how these systems work. Second, there's abuse of power. This is slightly different from bribery because it's about using your position for personal benefit even when money isn't directly changing hands. Maybe you're using government resources for personal projects. Maybe you're giving your friends and family members jobs they're not qualified for. Maybe you're living in government housing that's way nicer than what you're entitled to. The court specifically mentioned that Gou abused his power, which in Chinese legal terminology means he wasn't just taking bribes. He was actively misusing his official position in ways that benefited himself and harmed the state. Third, and this is where it gets really interesting, there's the network effect. Gou wasn't operating alone. Corruption at this level never is. He was part of a broader network of officials, business people, and fixers who all benefited from keeping the system running. Think of it like a machine. Gou sits at the top as sports minister. Below him are dozens of officials who also want their cut. Around him are business people who need favors. And connecting all of them are intermediaries, people whose entire job is to facilitate these transactions while maintaining plausible deniability for everyone involved. One of the fascinating things about high-level Chinese corruption cases is how sophisticated they've become. We're not talking about briefcases full of cash anymore, though that still happens. We're talking about shell companies, offshore accounts, family members who mysteriously become successful business people despite no apparent skills or experience, real estate holdings in foreign countries, artwork that gets sold for inflated prices, and a dozen other techniques to hide the money trail. Chinese investigators, to their credit, have gotten pretty good at unraveling these schemes. They have special anti-corruption agencies that do nothing but track down officials who are on the take. And when they find someone, they don't mess around. Now, let's talk about the specific amount, $33.4 million. That number is so specific that you know the investigators went through every transaction with a fine-tooth comb. They probably tracked down bank accounts in multiple countries, interviewed dozens or hundreds of people, analyzed years of financial records, and reconstructed the entire web of corruption. In yuan, the Chinese currency, that's approximately 240 million yuan. To put that in perspective for Chinese citizens, the average annual salary in China is around 100,000 yuan. So Gou took bribes equivalent to 2,400 years of average salaries. That's not just corruption, that's legendary corruption. But here's something that makes this even more outrageous. Gou was already wealthy. As a high-ranking government official, he had a good salary, excellent benefits, a comfortable life. He wasn't stealing to feed his family or escape poverty. He was stealing because he could, because the opportunity was there, and because he apparently believed he'd never get caught. That's the thing about corruption at this level. It's not driven by need, it's driven by greed. It's the mentality of, I can get away with this, so why not? Multiplied by years and years of getting away with it until you start to feel invincible. Spoiler alert, he wasn't invincible. Act 3. The Fall. How he got caught. 18:00-26:00. So how did Gou Zhongwen go from powerful sports minister to death row inmate? Because that's quite a fall, and it didn't happen overnight. In 2022, Gou retired from his position as sports minister. Now, in Chinese politics, when a high-ranking official suddenly retires, especially if they're not that old or if the retirement seems abrupt, people start wondering, is this a normal retirement? Or is this a we're investigating you and you need to go away quietly retirement? Turns out, it was the latter. China has been running an anti-corruption campaign since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012. It's called Tigers and Flies, which is actually a pretty catchy name for a massive crackdown. The idea is that they're going after both big targets, tigers, and small targets, flies. No one is supposed to be safe. Now, critics argue that these anti-corruption campaigns are also convenient ways to eliminate political rivals and consolidate power. And that's probably true to some extent. But it's also true that there is a lot of corruption in China's government and state-owned enterprises, and many of the people getting caught really are corrupt. Gou Zhongwen definitely falls into the actually corrupt category. The evidence against him was apparently overwhelming. According to reports, the investigation began while he was still in office, which means investigators were building their case carefully, documenting everything, and waiting for the right moment to strike. In China's system, you don't get arrested and then investigated. You get investigated, and then when they have an airtight case, you get arrested and it's basically over. The Chinese Communist Party has an internal disciplinary system called the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, or CCDI. These are the people who investigate party members for corruption and other violations. And trust me, you do not want these people looking into your finances. When the CCDI starts investigating you, they can detain you in a system called shuangguo. Though it's been renamed, the practice continues. This is basically where they hold you in isolation, cut you off from the outside world, and interrogate you until you confess to everything. It's controversial, it's probably coercive, and it's very effective at getting confessions. Gou presumably went through this process. He was detained, investigated, and eventually expelled from the Communist Party. Being expelled from the party might not sound like a big deal to people in other countries, but in China, for someone who's been a party member their entire adult life, it's a massive humiliation. It means you've been officially declared unworthy, your entire career is erased, and you're about to face criminal prosecution. After expulsion from the party comes the criminal trial, and this is where things get really serious. Chinese courts have a conviction rate of over 99%. When you go to trial in China, especially for a high-profile corruption case, the verdict is essentially predetermined. The trial is more of a public shaming ritual than an actual adversarial legal proceeding. You stand there, you listen to all your crimes being read out, and then you're sentenced. In December 2024, Gou Zhongwen was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for accepting bribes and abusing power. Additionally, all of his personal assets were confiscated. Everything. His bank accounts, his property, his luxury goods, everything he owned, gone. Seized by the state. His political rights were also permanently stripped, which means even if he somehow survives, more on that in a moment, he can never vote, never hold office, never participate in political life again. But let's talk about that sentence. Death with a 2-year reprieve. What does that actually mean? Here's where Chinese law gets interesting, and frankly, a little more humane than you might expect given the whole sentencing someone to death thing. A death sentence with a 2-year reprieve is exactly what it sounds like. You're sentenced to death, but the execution is suspended for 2 years. During those 2 years, you're in prison, and your behavior determines what happens next. If you behave well during those 2 years, if you show remorse, if you don't cause problems, your sentence is typically commuted to life in prison. And in practice, that's what happens in the vast majority of cases. The death penalty with reprieve is essentially a face-saving way to hand down an extremely harsh sentence while still leaving room for mercy. However, and this is important, if you do cause problems during those 2 years, if you're violent or try to escape or refuse to show remorse, the death sentence can be carried out. So it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's more like a you're going to prison forever, but we're giving you a tiny chance to not die card. There's also a provision where, after the sentence is commuted to life imprisonment, good behavior can lead to further reductions down to a fixed term, potentially as low as 25 years. But for someone Gou's age, he's in his 60s, even 25 years is essentially a life sentence. So realistically, Gou Zhongwen will spend the rest of his life in a Chinese prison. He'll never be free again. He'll never enjoy the wealth he accumulated. He'll never see his family except during closely monitored prison visits. Everything he worked for, everything he stole, it's all gone. And his case will be used as a warning to other officials. This is what happens when you get too greedy. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Is $33 million in bribes really worth a death sentence? From a Western perspective, this seems extreme. In the United States or Europe, someone convicted of this level of corruption might get 10 or 15 years in prison, maybe 20 if the case is particularly egregious. They'd probably serve less than that with good behavior. Death, even with a reprieve, seems disproportionate. But China sees it differently. In China's legal philosophy, high-level corruption is a form of betrayal against the state and the people. You were given power and trust, and you abused it for personal gain. That's not just a crime. It's a moral failing that undermines the entire system. There's also a practical deterrent effect. China wants officials to be terrified of corruption charges. They want people to think twice before accepting that bribe or abusing that power, because the consequences are so severe. Whether this actually deters corruption is debatable. Despite years of anti-corruption campaigns and harsh sentences, corruption remains a significant problem in China. But the government keeps trying, and people like Gou Zhongwen keep becoming examples. His case is part of a broader pattern of corruption in Chinese sports administration that's been uncovered over the past several years. In fact, multiple officials from China's sports system have been investigated, expelled, and prosecuted. It turns out that sports administration, with its huge budgets, major construction projects, and international prestige, is incredibly vulnerable to corruption. Think about what's at stake. When China hosts a major sporting event, we're talking billions of dollars in construction, infrastructure, advertising, and operations. Every contract is worth millions. Every decision about which company gets which job is an opportunity for someone to take a cut. And it's not just hosting events. It's the day-to-day operations of running sports in a country of 1.4 billion people. Building local sports facilities, funding provincial teams, managing sports schools, organizing domestic competitions, all of this involves massive amounts of money flowing through a bureaucratic system. Where there's money and bureaucracy, there's opportunity for corruption. Chinese football, in particular, has been plagued by corruption scandals. Multiple football officials and referees have been prosecuted for match fixing and accepting bribes. The Chinese Football Association has essentially been gutted by anti-corruption investigations. And here's the irony. All of this corruption has actually hurt Chinese sports performance. Despite massive investment, despite government support, despite a huge population to draw from, China has struggled in team sports like football. Many people point to corruption and mismanagement as key reasons why. When officials are more interested in lining their pockets than developing talent, when coaches get appointed based on who they know rather than what they know, when resources get siphoned off to private accounts instead of being invested in training facilities, the whole system suffers. So in a twisted way, Gou Zhongwen and officials like him haven't just stolen money. They've stolen China's athletic potential. They've betrayed not just the government or the Communist Party, but every young athlete who could have benefited from properly invested resources. That's probably part of why the Chinese government is so harsh on sports corruption. It's not just about the money. It's about national pride and international prestige. So what can we learn from Gou Zhongwen's spectacular fall from grace? First, no matter how powerful you are, no matter how untouchable you seem, if you're systematically corrupt, it can all come crashing down. Gou probably thought he was safe. He'd been doing this for years, maybe decades. He'd built a network of protection. He'd risen to one of the highest positions in Chinese sports. And then, suddenly, it was all over. Second, greed is a trap. Gou didn't need $33 million. He was already living comfortably. But once you start taking bribes, once you get used to that extra money, it's hard to stop. It becomes normal. You rationalize it. Everyone does it. I deserve this. Just one more, and then I'll stop. Until you can't stop, and you get caught. Third, corruption has real victims. It's easy to think of corruption as a victimless crime, especially when it's happening at high levels of government. Who cares if some rich official takes bribes from some rich business person? But corruption distorts everything. It makes systems less efficient. It rewards the wrong people. It takes resources away from where they're needed. In Gou's case, the victims were potentially thousands of athletes who could have had better training, better facilities, better support if the money had been used properly. The victims were citizens who saw their tax money stolen. The victims were honest officials who did their jobs properly but got passed over for promotions because they wouldn't play the corruption game. Fourth, different countries handle corruption very differently. China's approach, with its death sentences and life imprisonments and total asset forfeiture, is extreme by global standards. But it reflects how seriously China's government takes the issue, at least publicly. In other countries, corruption at this level might result in a few years in a comfortable prison followed by early release. The official might lose some assets, but keep others. They might be banned from holding office, but could still live a decent life afterward. There's no universal consensus on what the right punishment for corruption is. But clearly, China has decided that extreme punishment is the way to go, whether as genuine deterrent or political theater. And finally, this case is a reminder that even in authoritarian systems, even in places where the government has enormous power, individuals can still get away with enormous crimes for a long time. Gou wasn't caught for years, possibly decades. He rose to the top of his field while systematically stealing. It was only when the political winds changed, when the anti-corruption campaign intensified, when someone decided he was a target, that it all caught up with him. Gou Zhongwen's story is, in many ways, a tragedy. Not because we should feel sorry for him. He made his choices, and he'll face the consequences. But it's tragic that someone who could have used their position to genuinely help Chinese sports, to develop talent, to make a positive difference, instead chose to enrich themselves at everyone else's expense. It's tragic that corruption is so widespread that we're not even that surprised by a $33 million bribery case. It's tragic that even harsh punishments don't seem to fully deter people from trying the same thing. But it's also a fascinating window into how power, greed, and justice intersect in modern China. It's a case study in how corruption works at high levels, how it's investigated, and how it's punished. Right now, Gou Zhongwen is sitting in a Chinese prison, knowing that his death sentence hangs over him for the next 2 years. He's probably reflecting on his choices, wondering if all that money was worth it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. His story will be told and retold in Chinese anti-corruption education. His case will be cited in training sessions for government officials. His name will become synonymous with greed and betrayal. And other officials will look at what happened to him and hopefully think twice before accepting that bribe or abusing that power. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll think they're smarter, more careful, less likely to get caught. And the cycle will continue until the next high-profile corruption case makes headlines. But for now, Gou Zhongwen's fall from sports minister to death row inmate is complete. From the heights of power to the depths of disgrace. From managing billions in sports funding to having every asset seized. From being a respected official to being an example of everything wrong with corruption. And somewhere in China, a young government official is watching this case unfold and making a choice about what kind of public servant they want to be. Trust me, fam, corruption stories like this remind us that consequences are real, even for the powerful. If this story shocked you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more incredible true stories about power, greed, and justice from around the world. Drop a comment. Do you think death sentences for corruption are justified, or is this too extreme? What would an appropriate punishment be? Let's discuss in the comments. And remember, whether you're a government minister or just an ordinary person, integrity matters. Your choices have consequences. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.